Yes, this morning is going to be full of innovation and excitement, and you should be full of inspiration by the end of the morning, ready for this afternoon. I hope you're looking forward to it. I certainly am. We're going to start off with two speakers, and then after that we'll run into the innovation sessions where we will have, there won't be time for questioning so much. There'll be a panel session after that, so that the speakers will be lined up here and you'll be able to question them. For that part of the morning, if you are going to use the app, whatever it's called, please specify who the question is for, so that it's easier for me to relay it to that person. Right, so the very first speaker we have this morning is, as Collier said, young person's perspective. So it gives me incredible pleasure to welcome George Hobson. And if you've read George's CV, you'll be very impressed already. So he's only 18 and he's studying law and science at Victoria University, and he's dedicated his life already to conservation projects and environmental lobbying. He's done a lot of work with the Department of Conservation, Forest and Bird and regional councils. I won't waste any of George's time, and welcome George to the stage. Do you want that or the microphone? Okay, just make sure it's high enough. Cheers.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko maunga kia te maunga te rau nei taku nākau, ko raukawa te moana e maharahara nei aku maharahara. E tipo ake au ki tāmaki makaurau e mihi ana ki ngā tohu o nehi o te whanganui atara e noho nei au. Ko Hobson toku whānau, ko George Hobson toku ingoa, ko tēnei taku mihi ki ngā tangata whenua o te rohine. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. When I was about 11 years old, I once innocently and fairly naively asked a friend of my parents, "That kōwhai tree in your backyard, that will surely be protected from future owners cutting it down, right? It's far too important, the tui like it too much, and it's got too many keraru coming and visiting it for someone to just cut it down, right?" I was fairly disappointed with the answer. By age 11, I'd heard of climate change, and I knew that that was a problem, and I understood very broadly that trees were important in producing oxygen that helped fight against climate change. And I struggled to understand why decision makers would prioritize developing land over protecting the trees that provide us with life. And you'll have to forgive my Lorax-esque introduction, but it's that mindset, albeit slightly more nuanced, that I still approach this with today. And it's why I want to talk to you about three things. Firstly, the importance of nature. Secondly, the power of resource management to either protect nature for generations to come or to condemn its existence to bygone eras, and how we can ensure this power is wielded for good. Because from my perspective, nature truly is the cornerstone of society. It has an immense intrinsic value and it deserves to be protected for that, but it also provides the natural world with nothing less than its blood supply, lungs, and kidneys. It supplies the environment and it protects communities and people. But nature is being destroyed, and quite frankly, we are doing the destroying. At the moment, here in Aotearoa New Zealand and right across the rest of the world, we are faced with two unprecedented crises: the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. I think this is clear. But what I think is not clear, and what is often overlooked, is the interface between these two crises. The fact that they are inherently intertwined, and the fact that they make each other worse. They aren't separate, and I could spout statistics and numbers at you for hours about this, but I think I'd rather tell you a story. Last year, there was a climate change-induced extreme weather event in Te Whanganui-a-Tara, Wellington, and it resulted in a large amount of silt entering the Wellington harbour and an increase in the temperature of the water. And as a result, a korora colony, a little penguin colony on Machu Somes Island, lost 66 chicks to starvation. This crisis is urgent. It's genuinely urgent. And the impacts of a failure to act on this crisis will be disproportionately felt by my generation, the younger generation, and those generations that come after me. Young people deserve urgent action because despite having almost none of the decision-making power here in Aotearoa, we will suffer the consequences or the benefits of action on these issues for decades. But how does urgent action happen? Well, I might be preaching to the choir a little bit here and saying that resource management is obviously vital in protecting the environment. We just need to look at significant natural areas, policy statements such as the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, and the Resource Management Act itself for things that resource management has contributed which manifestly protect the environment. And people are important too, because we can't just have these tools. We need people to be prepared to use them. It's reminded of the whakatauki, hiaha te me nui o te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. What is the most important thing in the world? It is the people, it is the people, it is the people. Because ultimately it is the people who hold the power over the management of our resources in Aotearoa at the moment. And it is more important now than probably ever before that this power is wielded for good to protect the future of rangatahi and te taiao. It must be the case that individuals entrusted with the privilege of managing our resources do so with the full cognizance of the enormity of the environmental crisis facing us at the moment, and with the willingness to act to safeguard our country for both people and nature for generations and decades to come. So, we need urgent action. But urgent action where and how? Well, these are all excellent questions that serve to cut through my youthful exuberance, and as a result, I have 4 key suggestions for you this morning. We need strong national direction, which puts nature first and at the heart of it. In all pieces of legislation, but particularly in upcoming resource management legislation, and in national policy statements, to ensure we never see another consenting pathway for mining in wetlands again. We need bold implementation in action plans, in regional policy statements, in documents below regional policy statements, in exercises of discretion, and for that matter, in the matters that can be considered in exercises of discretion, and in ring-fencing funding to ensure that implementation is able to happen. We need effective enforcement because resource consents come with conditions for a reason, and it is vital that these are not breached. And we need better and much more accessible consultation in resource management processes. Because I am a second-year law student with many or multiple years of experience in environmental policy matters at a national level, and I open a resource management consultation document and I am confused by what it means. And if I am confused by what it means, then imagine how confused every other person who doesn't have a background in law or in environmental policy is when they open those kinds of documents. It cannot be the case that the best we can do is scaring these people who want to have their voice heard away. Their voice matters, and it is important that it is captured. You shouldn't need a planning qualification to be able to tell decision makers that you want the environment to be protected. So, we need bold, courageous, and ambitious action across all levels of the biodiversity system. Because right now is the time to do that. It is the time to make a change, to shake up the resource management system in Aotearoa New Zealand, and to protect nature for generations to come. The reform of the resource management system currently being undertaken is quite literally the chance of a lifetime to be able to put nature first, and to show how bold and courageous we can be as New Zealanders. And I want to be able to, in decades to come, turn to my future children and proudly say, yes, we did take this opportunity to put nature first. So, to sum up, nature is in crisis. We have a biodiversity and a climate crisis bearing down on us in Aotearoa New Zealand. It will get worse, but there is hope. There is hope in the fact that currently before each and every single one of you an opportunity sits. The power you all collectively wield over our natural environment here in Aotearoa New Zealand is immense, and if you choose to use it for good, it has the power to radically transform the way we look at New Zealand and the way New Zealand itself looks. So, that being said, I would like to leave you with a challenge this morning. My challenge to you is simple. Be courageous. Be courageous in writing policies, in implementing policies, in funding policies, and in advising others' policies. Be courageous for the sake of rangatahi who don't have the power that you do, but who do have to live with the decisions that you make. You all have the opportunity to make the world a better place for future generations and for my generation. I urge you, please take it. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you very much.
Well, if that hasn't given us something to think about, then I don't know what will. We have some questions. George, do you think that good legislation is a lead to environmental outcomes that we're looking for, or is more needed?
The question? It's a question. Sorry, good.
So there they are.
Oh. I think that good legislation is a starting point. It's vital that we have those national level frameworks, because without those national level frameworks that prioritise nature, it won't have the trickle down effect into all of the regional level policies. So we need national direction that says nature is central, needs to be protected, and if that exists, then that will then trickle down into all of the regional planning processes. What I think is important, though, is that we have that as a starting point to build on. It can't be all that we do. We need to be bold in our work, and we need to have people who are willing to be ambitious in resource management. But that, I think, is a really important starting point and has probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make a real difference to Aotearoa.
Where do you choose? A couple there, a couple of goodies.
All right, accessible consultation. The question is, what does a more accessible consultation process look like? It's a very good question, and I'll give an example of something that worked really well. I was involved in the process of writing and establishing Te Mana o Te Taiao, the Aotearoa New Zealand biodiversity strategy, and in doing that, when we had the discussion document, we worked with a group called The Hive, who produced a whole series of very approachable bite-sized questions, like, what would you like biodiversity to look like in 5, 10, 15 years? What's most important to you about biodiversity? What do you think needs to be improved in your neighbourhood about biodiversity? All these types of easy, approachable questions that people can get into and can answer easily, and that decision makers can then take a look at and go, okay, how do we transform that into resource management speak? How can we turn that into a policy? But it provides an opportunity for people to contribute right at the get-go and to feed in their ideas, be it broad scale. That is a way that will allow people to actually have their voice heard in what I think is a meaningful way, as long as it's engaged in good faith by decision makers. So they need to be able to have their voice heard, and then that needs to be listened to despite the fact that it's not in legal language and in a formal consultation process.
Right, there's a good one there about climate change.
I think that it's an interesting question. I would start by giving the example of the School Strike for Climate marches, wherein more than 100,000 people marched across Aotearoa New Zealand demanding that we take action on climate change. It is it is in the forefront of young people's minds, of rangatahi's minds, that climate action is vital. It is recognised by the United Nations, by even the generally conservative International Energy Agency, and in fact by our very own government, that climate change is, in the words of our Prime Minister, this generation's nuclear-free moment. This is something that's well recognised, I think, by the science. It's something that's the implications of failing to act on climate are already being seen in the extreme weather events we're seeing around the world and in Aotearoa New Zealand, extreme flooding that we've seen just more in the last few years than ever before. These are tangible things that we can see are an issue and that are going to get worse. And from my perspective, that is terrifying, because it is me and my generation and my friends and my future children that have to live with the consequences of that. And I think if we fail to see that, and we fail to actually recognise how important urgent action is, and how important respecting the intergenerational equity of this issue is, that would be a real shame.
Test it.
It is now. Thank you, George. We have been very, very fortunate to have you here. The first part of your talk had me really worried about that salutary example of how things can go terribly wrong, and I think that really makes us all stop and think. And being a bit older, I always thought that I hope my kids wouldn't have to deal with some of the stuff that's happening, but it's not only are they having to deal with it, but it's getting worse. So it really was a bit of a worry to hear that. But I was and I think everyone was very keen to hear your 4 solutions, and certainly a hint of optimism about the future. So thank you very much, and I've just got a small gift for you.
Thank you.